problem of evil then. So in front of you, you have your next sheet. This was the third topic that you highlighted as the topic that you were least happy with. There's quite a lot of boxes, so we'll try and do the first side and then we will have a little break and read another essay. First part then, where you need to start is your definition. So you have two very thin boxes at the top. This is for your natural and moral definitions from Aquinas. The bit underneath that's attached is for C.S. Lewis, which was coming in a second. This is a very good place to start an essay. So in an introduction, you need to be able to explain what evil is, what the different types are. Natural and evil are the different, natural and moral are the different types. If you want to use somebody else like Augustine's definitions, that's fine. Aquinas, though, just gives you that bit of wider reading. So Aquinas says that natural evil is only evil when looked at from a human perspective. Earthquakes are just natural world fulfilling its potential. Can anybody remember the word linked with the idea that when you see things just from your own human perspective? Egocentric, well done, Josh. So this is a very egocentric view. The natural world, earthquakes, tsunamis, are not evil. They are just nature doing its purpose. And if it happens to kill people, we then think it's evil. But why? An earthquake is just the movement of tectonic plates. If you happen to live on them, well, of course you might die. So it's the idea that it's not evil, it is only nature doing its purpose. Moral evil is the usual definition, and this is the idea that it's humans. It's humans moving away from their true potential. It is the actions of free agents and the actions of autonomous beings doing bad things. Underneath that, but still attached to the same box, you then have a quote from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is fantastic. Former atheist, Christian intellectual in later life. He wrote a brilliant book called Mere Christianity, very, very thin book, but very good. He says, God allows suffering because we are like blocks of stone out of which the sculptor carves the forms of man. Blows of his chisel which hurt us so much are what make us perfect. You obviously do not need to learn that quote, but what you can do, because again you could use it as an introduction, you recognise the idea that pain, suffering, evil is the idea that it's what help develop us. It's what carves man into perfection. This works very, very nicely for Irenaeus and John Hick later on. But even if you just remember blows of his chisel which hurt us so much, that idea that God is helping us develop and mature. If you have any questions or problems, just let me know. Don't forget to summarise as best as you can. Yeah, the film, no, it is actually a film. Shadowlands is a film about C.S. Lewis's life, but you can still quote it, that's fine. Yeah. Make sure you get the right A name in the start of your essay. Don't put Augustine says. Make sure you remember that it's Aquinas. Aquinas doesn't come up anywhere else in this PowerPoint, so this is just Aquinas. I'm going to move on in just a sec. Okay, box underneath is for that bit there in the box. So again, there's not a lot to write, so just fill it out and spread it out. You need to know what the nature of the problem is. Evil is only a problem when believing in a God with divine attributes. The divine attributes being all loving, all powerful, etc. There are two aspects that you need to know. First aspect is the logical aspect. The second is the evidential. These aspects are the aspects of the nature of the problem. So the first problem is logical. How logically can God exist with evil? If God has all of these attributes, how can God logically exist? The second is evidential. The evidence of evil in the world is far too much, therefore implies God does not exist. This could quite easily be a question. Critically assess the nature of the problem of evil. You have to look at what does it mean by the nature of the problem. It is only a problem when you believe in an all-powerful, all-loving God. People that don't believe in God don't have a problem with evil, it's just a matter of life. Buddhists don't have a problem with evil because they don't believe in a creator, all-loving God. It is only a problem for those that believe, especially in the Christian God. They also might use the words logical or evidential in your exam. So if it says critically assess the logical aspects of the problem of evil, the logical means God's attributes. Evidential means evidence. So you must research into evil in the world before your exam, but I'll come back to that in a second. So you then have the triangle. This is the logical aspects presented by Epicurus. So basically just write around your triangle at the two sides. The triad is known as the inconsistent triad. This is the classic formulation of the problem. Can anybody remember where else we come across Epicurus?
Epicurean hypothesis.
Epicurean hypothesis found in what topic? No. Good try, Josh. And no, not cosmological. Teleological, correct. Who uses the Epicurean hypothesis in the teleological argument?
David Hume.
David Hume is correct. Can anybody remember what the Epicurean hypothesis says, Josh?
That the universe is just made up of random particles, and at a certain point they're going to collide and create the universe. Like it's inevitable. It doesn't mean there's a God.
First part correct. Conclusion goes off a bit. Nearly right with it though, Josh. Does anybody else Epicurean hypothesis? Yes. So the Epicurean, well done, Jack. The Epicurean hypothesis is the idea that everything's in random motion, everything's random ordered, and over time it evolves into ordered structure. So it shows design, not a designer. So that's where we also come across Epicurus, but in teleological. So this time for this topic, Epicurus is the idea of the problem, what the problem is. So the problem is, how can God, if he wants to help, so he's loving, but not able, then how is he all powerful? If God can prevent it, he has the power, but doesn't want to, then how is he all loving? And if God is both powerful and willing, then why do we suffer? So the 3 points of the triad are all powerful, omnipotent, all loving, omnibenevolence, and evil and suffering. How can God have both of these attributes logically and evil still exists? Because either God doesn't love us or God doesn't have the power, otherwise evil would not happen. That's the logical aspect, because logically it doesn't make sense. Does anybody know where the term inconsistent triad actually came from? It was not named by Epicurus. Somebody else named it much, much later. Does anybody know? Kenzie? J.L. Mackie is correct. Very well done. Final little bit just to put around the triangle. Epicurus concluded that it's reasonable to suppose that due to the existence of evil, God is either not all-powerful or not all-loving, or just does not exist. He is not saying God doesn't exist. He's just saying it's reasonable to suppose that. In your exam, you cannot draw diagrams. This also goes for the nature of God topic. You cannot draw diagrams in your exam. You must explain it in prose. You have to explain it in sentences, so you can't draw a triangle. Also, never bullet point or number in essays. You only ever do that if you're running seriously out of time. but it's not academic writing to use bullet points or numbers. So J.L. Mackie coined the term inconsistent triad. It is from an Epicurean idea. Don't forget, Epicurus wouldn't have been talking about the Christian God. He'd just be talking about the idea of God itself, the nature of God, and that this is where the problem comes from. If you get a question in the exam that's, for example, on John Hick and the Irenaean hypothesis, Irenaean theodicy, you don't have to talk about this. In fact, quite often this takes you off the question. Don't think that you have to talk about this in an exam. I often find that if this is written at the beginning of an essay or an introduction, it really takes you off the point. If you can't see the link to the question, you don't have to put it in. So this doesn't have to be there. If the question's on logical aspects, or if the question is on the nature of the problem, then yes, this is very good. All right, box underneath, another skinny one. You've got David Hume with John Stuart Mill. David Hume, tiny bit John Stuart Mill. In Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, quite a lot of the philosophy that we look at for David Hume is in that book, like the Theological, etc. He said, God is not omnipotent, or God is not all-loving, or evil does not exist. He concludes that clearly there is far too much evil. That is the one of those that we cannot deny. You cannot deny that evil does not exist. So either God is impotent or malicious, so not all-powerful or cruel. Either way, not the God of classical theism. Therefore, the God of classical theism doesn't exist. God might exist, but not the God of classical theism. God of classical theism meaning what? On the omnis, excellent, Jack. So yeah, God of classical theism just means the omnis. Present, knowing, power, love, etc. John Stuart Mill also says the God of classical theism doesn't exist. That's why quite an important aspect of nature of God in the A2 topic overlaps with the problem of evil. You can overlap them and make links. The Boethian God and the problem of evil, the Boethian God idea actually allows for evil to happen because time is a cluster and God cannot distinguish what happens when. But then Boethius' God doesn't necessarily have that all-loving quality about it. Jade?
Could you bring like Boethius in?
Absolutely. Examiners really want you to bring in things like Boethius, definitely. What examiners want, and this is something that we'll do last of all before your exams, and you'll probably do it for maybe the Easter holiday homework, get it started, is what are called synoptic links. Basically linking all your topics together, all your philosophy together, all your ethics together, all your Christian thought together. So if you've got a question on the person of Jesus, you can bring in Mary Daly from the A2 topic. That is absolutely fine. That's what examiners want. They want you to show depth and breadth of knowledge. You do that by making links to other topics. Josh?
Does John Stuart Mill go on the little box?
The little box at the side, yes please. Bethany? Yes, yeah, the God of classical theism doesn't exist, yes. If you want to use it in the exam, just Google it and see what book it's from. Okay, excellent. All right, this doesn't have a box. This is what I want you to write at the top of your sheet. So then right at the top where it says problem able, just write yourself a note or put it near your bubble or one of your boxes. I mean, put research BBC News for natural and moral evil. You have to give evidence, especially if the question is of evidential evil in your exam. but I don't see how you can do a problem of evil essay without talking about some evil in the world. For example, if there's suddenly an earthquake that happens a week before your exam, if there's a terrorist attack or threat, these are things you need to talk about. So you cannot rely upon me to look for natural or moral evils before your exam. So don't just Google natural evil because BBC News won't recognise it, but just type in things like hurricane, tsunami, floods, things like that. Moral evil, type in murders, terrorism, etc. Give an example of what's happening. This really impresses examiners. All right, you're doing really well, everyone. So there are 4 little boxes because there's 4 names who say there are no problem. There is no problem with evil. The first is Mary Eddy Baker. She argues that evil and suffering don't even exist. They are constructs of our mind. Buddhist second box, doesn't matter which you put in which box, doesn't matter. Buddhist suffering is part of existence. They don't believe in a creator God, so suffering isn't a problem. Suffering and evil are only a problem for those that believe in an all-powerful, all-loving God. Bertrand Russell says it's a smoke screen, and Aristotle says about the prime mover. I'll just let you jot these down and I'll explain them in a second. If you would like to make yourself a note, or just remember, you don't have to use all 4 of them. Even just 1 is good enough. But what you have to do is, you have to say whether you agree or disagree. Not I think, but use the language that we've been practicing. So, Aristotle's view of the prime mover being indifferent to suffering is vague because, or is far-fetched because, or is interesting because. So what Aristotle is saying there is that Aristotle's prime mover, the sustainer of cause and effect and motion that we are attracted to but has no awareness of us at all, suffering's not a problem. The prime mover's not aware of us. We are aware of the prime mover, we just know it through motion, potentiality to actuality. Therefore, it's not a problem because we can't blame the prime mover. Just the same as Bertrand Russell. If you want to use Bertrand Russell's argument, say how it's credible or illogical or problematic. So he says that God is used as a smoke screen. Evil is just a brute fact of life. Brute fact meaning it's just something that happens, deal with it. Smoke screen is a very interesting idea actually. The smoke screen idea is the concept that we cover evil in this world with a smoke screen saying, well, God should help. God should have stopped it. God should do something. The smoke screen is for our own inactivity. We don't do something because we blame God. We don't do something because we cover it in a smoke screen saying God should help or do something. No, if God does or does not exist, it should still not stop us from actually acting upon evil and helping one another. So you only need to use 1 if you want to, but critically engage with it. No, Aristotle's not a quote, no. I think the only thing on there that is a quote is brute fact from Bertrand Russell. Looking good. Skinny box underneath then, we are now moving into Augustine territory. So the skinny box underneath is just for the meaning of theodicy. So you put Augustine's theodicy. The meaning of theodicy is justification of God with evil. Very, very important. If it was just justification of God, then you'd be doing it with teleological and cosmological. You're not. The whole point of a theodicy is you are justifying God with evil. in the world. So Augustine and then John Hick are both presenting ideas of how God can logically exist with evil. And the first is, of course, Augustine. If you get a question in the exam with the word theodicy in it, define theodicy within your introduction. Skinny box underneath, quite a lot on the slide, but it's all stuff you already know. So you already know that Augustine interpreted Genesis literally. You also know that he had a very traditional view of God, and it was the God of classical theism. How do you know this? Because he's the same St. Augustine you studied in the Christian thought topic. It's the same pear-stealing man that his mother told him to get rid of his concubine and that believes all women are sinful. This is the same Augustine that takes everything literally, including Genesis. So you know that already. What is added, but it's quite big, is this idea of hierarchy of being. Now, this is just extra detail, this is just extra information. But basically what Augustine argues is that God is being itself. God is the supreme being. But all things God created reflects this being to a greater or lesser extent. And so he gives this quote: "Since God is supreme being, it follows that he gave being to all that he created out of nothing. To some things he gave more of being and to others less, and in this way arranged an order of natures in a hierarchy of being." What that means very simply is that humans, Adam, the first man created, was given or reflected more of God's being compared with animals, for example. And so everything God created reflects God's being in some way, some things more than others. This is simply there as something you can drop into an essay if you wanted to. So, for example, you're talking about Adam and Eve. You can say Adam reflected God to a greater extent. Therefore, God is being itself, and mankind reflects this more than animals, as seen in the hierarchy of being, or something like that. If you don't mention it, it's no big deal. This idea of God as supreme being links to another philosophy AS topic. Does anybody know which one it is? I'm really pushing you now.
The what, sorry?
So what other AS philosophy topic does the idea of being, so God is being itself, what does that link to? Alex?
Ontological.
Why?
Because it talks about how God is perfect being, essentially, and therefore he must exist in mind and reality and so on.
Excellent. Very, very good, Alex. It links to the ontological argument, the idea that God is supreme being, that God is the linking the idea of mind and reality together, and that it is the supreme and perfect from both Descartes and Anselm. Very, very clever, Alex. Well done. What does the word ontos mean? As in ontological argument, ontos. Being. So the actual name of the argument means being. And so again, you might not use it in problem of evil, but you could link this into ontological argument. Absolutely fine. That's quite high level though, is that? All right, underneath you have 4 large boxes because there's 4 main parts of Augustine's argument. We'll do these 4 and 1 more, and then we'll have a bit of a brain break from this. So, number 1, the origins of evil and the role of free will. Please label your boxes, don't worry about the numbers. The numbers are to help you remember that there's 4 main parts to his argument. Please don't number them. please don't also name it the origins of evil or something like that. An examiner will not have a clue what you mean. It is just so that you remember there's 4 key aspects to his argument. Also, the examiners might use words like origins of evil in your exam. So it's so that you remember, oh, that's what's on that slide. The original rejection of God then by rebellious angels, moral evil who fell or turned away from God, causing natural evil. What you'll find with the problem of evil topic, it's all about word dropping. It's the language that you use. So in this case, this idea of original rejection, original first rejection, turning away from God. First of all, by the angels, including who? Lucifer, excellent. Lucifer was God's right-hand angel, right-hand man. Lucifer turned his back on God and therefore fell from God's grace. Lucifer, also known as the devil.
Is it slime with God?
Yes, yeah.
Is it Cain and Abel? The 2 brothers?
No, no.
Isn't that one killed and one killed the other, and I thought the one who killed the brother then fell and then he became. They weren't in heaven. I don't know. I think I've got my stories.
Not sure, Jade. Have a look. Yeah, Google it.
I thought one was the angel. No, like kids.
Yeah.
I thought one of them fell from heaven because he killed us. I think I've just merged 2 stories.
All right, back to this then. So the thing that you have to remember, and this is something that we'll have to emphasise throughout this, is moral evil comes first. Without moral evil, natural evil would not happen. It's the moral evil by the rebellious angels, that's them turning their backs on God, that results or produces or causes natural evil. Natural evil would never have happened if it wasn't for moral evil. Humans are also created in the likeness of God, but are given free will, and so it's Adam and Eve who ate from the apple of the knowledge of the apple of knowledge of good and evil from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it's through this that again caused natural evil to enter the world. So first of all, Adam and Eve let it into the world by misusing their free will. This corrupted and destroyed God's natural perfect order, creating disharmony and resulting in natural evil. I will go over the story in a second. I will go over the key words in a second. There are some very specific things examiners would be looking for. So Adam and Eve lived in paradise. They lived in perfection. Because they turned away from God and did what they were not meant to do, this resulted in natural evil. They destroyed the perfection which brought in that natural evil. So first comes moral, then comes natural. Without moral, natural would never happen. So in the case of Adam and Eve, and again, jot any of this down in your box if you're not happy with the story. Adam and Eve made a covenant with God. A covenant is a promise. That promise was, do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was the covenant, the promise that was made between God and man. Why did they make that promise? Because free will would not mean anything unless they had a choice. If you can do anything you want, that isn't free will. Free will only makes sense when you have a choice between one action or another action. So in order to make their free will make sense, God had to give them a choice. The choice was do or don't touch from the tree. I'm saying don't touch the tree, but you have a free choice to either do what I say or not do what I say. And in this case, they went against him. They broke the covenant. It has nothing to do with the actual apple. It's all to do with the fact they broke the promise they made to God. And because they broke the promise, they turned their backs on from God, and that welcomed in natural evil into the world. Is everybody happy with that story? Excellent. Box 2 then. Our punishment today. Fair enough, Adam and Eve, naughty, slap wrist, naughty chair, separating from God, epistemic distance to this world. But then why are we still punished today? The reason is because we are seminally present in Adam and Eve. We are the bloodline. We are all related, distantly. We all come from Adam and Eve. We are all the bloodline of Adam and Eve. This is the second box, please. We therefore deserve punishment. Nothing like holding a grudge. We deserve punishment. Natural evil is that fitting punishment. And you have there a fantastic quote from Augustine. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 words. Perfect length for a quote. All evil is either sin or a punishment for sin. Why is that such a good quote? Because it shows the two different types of evil. Evil is either sin, meaning moral evil, you're sinning, doing something naughty, or it's punishment for sin. The punishment is natural. Natural evil is a punishment and a result. It's a result of moral, and it's there as a punishment. Therefore, God is not responsible for moral because it's through our free choice. God is also not responsible for natural because it's a result of our corrupted ways. At the end of the day, yes, we're seminally present Adam and Eve, therefore don't deserve to be punished, but we still do moral evil today. So we still continue the wrong actions. God is also not responsible for intervening and correcting it. We broke it, we fix it. Jade.
Whose quote is?
Augustine. That's all it says, Augustine's quote, yes.
I googled it and that came up as your PowerPoint.
Oh. I imagine it's in Confessions. The idea of responsibility is very, very important. Again, you could get a question in the exam just on God's responsibility. So according to Augustine, God is not responsible. He's not responsible for moral because that's us with our free will. He's not responsible for natural because that's a result of our moral. He's also not responsible to stop it because it's a punishment and we broke it, so God's not going to fix it.
Well, how are we then supposed to know when this punishment's on? Like, if he's not just going to pop out?
Say it again, Paul.
How will we even know when this punishment's over if he's not getting involved? And if we're all semi present, then by that logic, the only way to solve it is just for everybody just not to agree.
Yeah, the idea of the seminally present, I think it's because we keep doing moral evils. We keep doing wrong things and moving away from the Bible and the Ten Commandments. So that's why natural evil is still here. As far as when does it stop? When you've done good things throughout your life and you go to heaven. So it'll stop when you're in paradise with God. That's when it'll stop. So you need to live a life where you are doing everything you can, following the guidelines and the rules, so that you are then rewarded eternally in paradise. Yeah. Augustine absolutely did not believe in purgatory, so it's either you can use purgatory as a criticism against him, But he did not believe in purgatory at all. He either believed you go one way or the other, heaven or hell. He's very black and white as far as that's concerned. Box 3, then the responsibility of God. God created everything perfect. He did not create evil. It is an absence of good. It's where there is no good. It's where good is lacking. That's when evil comes in. It is a privatio boni, or a privation. It's a privation of goodness. Students often struggle with the idea of privation. Privation sounds very much like deprivation. So if you said, oh, I'm deprived of something, you're deprived of food, for example, it's a privation of food, it's a lack of food. In this case, evil is a lack of goodness, it's a privation of goodness. This means that God cannot be blamed for evil. It's not a substance, it's not something you can make, it's an absence of good, such as blindness. Blindness is the absence of sight. It is therefore not a thing, it's a lack of something, in this case a lack of sight. You're doing very, very well. 2 slides left, and then we'll have a break.
Yeah, but it's like, you could say like diseases and stuff are actually things.
Oh, as far as evil and disease, wouldn't that be a lack of good health? Or is that taking it too far?
Well, you could say like being good health is a lack of bad health. It's just like whichever way.
Which angle you take? Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Jack. Yeah, I like it. Jade?
I don't get the whole absence thing, because surely you can't create an absence, because you don't create enough of it, therefore you create the absence. God created good, God didn't make enough good, therefore he created that absence.
But if God made everything perfect, that's full goodness, isn't it? But then the only thing that God made that wasn't purely good was us. So I think in that sense, I think your point's very good. I think the only thing that lacked goodness was us. And because of that, so whether you could blame God for saying he didn't create us fully perfect or full goodness is one thing, but then again, it's like blaming a parent for a bad child. I don't know, I think you've still got a very good point there. This idea of if it's an absence of good, therefore God didn't make enough of it. But the absence of good only comes in when we bring evil into the world. So the only absence of good that he did create was us, essentially. Yeah, I still like your point though, definitely. Fourth and final point then is why give us free will? If we are going from that point with Jade, if we are the source of the problem, if we are what's made everything go wrong, if we are the ones that do the moral evil that leads to the natural evil, then why bother giving us free will at all? Since God made the perfect world and it's not God's fault, other than making us with free will, God isn't responsible, so why give us free will? The reason is because it's more valuable. It was more valuable to have humans that were free agents than just obedient followers. God did not want obedient followers. And we'll get a load of free will defenders on the next side of the sheet. People that also argue that we need free will. So the words that you must remember, this idea of moral evil, natural evil, responsibility. Moral evil is caused by humans turning away from God. Natural evil is a result and left as a punishment. Those are the main things you need to remember. God is not responsible because God did not create it. All God created was humans with free will that then do wrong things. God didn't create it because you can't create an absence.
It's not like it's weird though, because like if I was to make like a bowl of cereal and I didn't put enough milk in it, and then I can't be blamed. I can't then say, oh well, I've not put enough milk in it, so that's the cereal's fault, or something like so. You know what I mean? Like if you've made something and then it's not got enough
Of what it
something
is.
in that you've wanted it to have, and it's not someone else's fault, is it? Essentially.
So you're basically saying that it is God's fault because God didn't make us with enough goodness, basically.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is a fair argument that God does hold some responsibility because God did make us with the free will to choose either way.
He's just stropped in it, like.
Definitely.
He just made something that's a bit rubbish, like a bit beta, and then he just said, oh, it's their fault.
Yeah. Go on, Leona.
You use the example of a teacher as well.
Go on.
Child hasn't learnt the things it needs to pass the next test. Is that the teacher's fault or the child's fault? Because the child hasn't been educated to the standard it needs.
One chance at that.
But
Say that it was
yeah,
not wanting to learn.
because it's still an absence, but yeah, the absence is created by the absence in that case that is created by the teacher not teaching the student the information. So the absence. I think you've all got valid points with the idea of this. The absence can be created, and therefore the responsibility is on the person that's done it. So no, I think you've got a fair point. And I like your examples as well, Josh.
Can't it be argued that we are just like obedient followers though? Because like whenever God appears to anyone in the Bible, like they don't do anything against, like they never disobey him at all.
Yeah.
So, like can't you just, we have free will in the time that he's not here, but like whenever he needs us, he just takes that away.
Yeah, I think you've got an excellent point there, Josh. This idea that maybe aren't we just obedient followers, because at the end of the day, you either do as you're told and do what God wants, or God will smite you and punish you. So it's certainly free will with a question mark, because it's the illusion of free will unless you do something that God doesn't like, and then he will punish you. So is that really true free will or not? And is that really anything other than obedient followers? Because if you are an obedient follower, then God will punish you. So no, I think that's a very fair point, Josh. Bethany, go on. Final bit for now. Oh, sorry. This world is soul deciding. Last bit in that fourth box. This world is soul deciding. What that means, according to Augustine, is your soul, your fate, your destiny is determined and decided in this world. You are either going to heaven or hell. So whatever you do in this life, whether you fall on the moral good or moral bad, your soul's fate will be decided in this world. There is no second chances after this life. Final box is just a summary. It's very, very small box at the bottom, because this is just the recap, but these are the bits you have to know. So, for example, last year's question was on natural evil. Students would have done the middle column. Moral evil, therefore, is brought into the world through the misuse of free will. We all commit moral evil. First was Adam and Eve and the angels, and it's a turning away from God and his commandments. Natural evil is a result of moral. It's what happens after. Brought in again by Adam and Eve, corrupting God's paradise. We are the bloodline, so we are punished, and we continue to do wrong things, therefore the punishment continues. God created a perfect world. He did not create evil. It says an absence, even though I think your points about can you still create an absence because it's still God doing a lack of something, I think is very, very good. So I think they're very genuine and decent evaluative arguments. Where there is goodness lacking is where moral evil happens. God is not responsible because we do it with our free will. That is quite a good point still. Can you blame God when we do something wrong with our free will? It's again like the parent. If a parent has made you and then you do something wrong with your free will, Can you blame your parents and put the responsibility on them? Can you blame God when we do things wrong? Can you blame a parent when you do things wrong? God is not responsible to stop it either, because it's a reminder of what we've done and it's a punishment for our bloodline. Take your time. This is about summarising now. You've done very well there. Second side, there's three boxes at the top. These are the last part of Augustine, and then we start John Hick and Irenaeus. These are the three criticisms against St. Augustine. The first is, for the first box, is the scientific. Basically, evolution and Darwin. Evolution and Darwin go against how literally you can accept the Genesis story, how seminally present we are in Adam and Eve. Actually, we're not. We're probably descended from apes rather than Adam and Eve. Therefore, we don't deserve punishment because we are all linked by bloodline. The second box for the second witness is the moral criticism. How could a good God let us suffer what Adam and Eve did? At the end of the day, if this is all true, how can God, as an all-loving God, still punish us and hold that grudge of what Adam and Eve did so that we are still punished today? Yes, we do moral evil ourselves, so shouldn't we be punished separately? What has the bloodline got to do with anything? Also, hell is quite a difficult concept to understand, but when did God create it? If God created it at the beginning, if he did create it at the beginning, is it because he anticipated needing it? Therefore, did he always know that we were going to eat the apple? Did he always know that Lucifer was going to turn against him? If God's all-knowing, he should have known it. But then again, he can't stop it. Finally, you've got the logical criticism from Schleiermacher. What he argues is, logically, a perfect world shouldn't go wrong. if it is so easy for Adam and Eve to break the perfection, it's not perfect. One apple, everything destroyed. Clearly can't have been perfect. Either, according to Schleiermacher, the world was not perfect, or God enabled or allowed it to go wrong. Either way, God is slightly responsible still.
Does it matter if we spell his name wrong?
Preferably try and not spell his name wrong. Just remember it's E-I-E.
Okay.
Yeah. A bit like Feuerbach, who's E-U-E. So yeah, do your best.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not game over if you do spell it wrong. What is something that you need to know though, and this is a mistake that students quite often make, and it's a logical mistake. Don't call it the moral criticism. Don't call it the scientific criticism. And please don't call it logical Schleiermacher. People call it logical Schleiermacher. That's not his name. His name is Schleiermacher. The logical is just the logical criticism against it. How logically a perfect world can't go wrong. Don't call it the logical criticism. An examiner will have absolutely no clue what you are talking about. The names of them, scientific, moral and logical, are just to help you remember and trigger your memory of, oh, scientific, oh, evolution, that's my criticism. Oh, moral, why would God let us suffer for Adam and Eve? Morally, it's not right, that's the weakness. Logical, how can a perfect world logically go wrong? Don't call it those, though. Don't call it the scientific or logical criticism, and certainly don't call it logical Schleiermacher. People have done that. They are simply there to help you trigger your memory. Yeah.
Dracula's concept of hell is quite big in the Bible, and it's not really mentioned that much.
Yeah, absolutely. Augustine is the one that really brings in these ideas of hell anyway. Augustine's the one that comes up with the idea of the fiery torment. Biblically, I think there's maybe one or two passages of burning hellfire, and that's about it.
What about Dante's Inferno as well? Did that come before?
No, Dante's Inferno came afterwards. The different levels and the different rings of hell. Again, you can bring it in, but all of that is influenced after Augustine. So Augustine is the one that brings in the ideas of hell anyway. Yeah. Because we are all sinful because of Adam and Eve, therefore we all deserve punishment with hell. Yeah. All right, John Hick time. So, John Hick, reworking of Irenaeus' Theodicy. You've got a large box underneath. This is for the first slide, so you can add this into that first box if you want to. John Hick, you will not get a question on Irenaeus. You will get a question on John Hick. So, John Hick, very, very recent, only just passed away, so he's very recent. Irenaeus came before Augustine. So, Irenaeus, we're talking old, whereas John Hick is quite recent.
Is that because, like, John Hicks, is he all that's given them specification to know?
Yes. So John Hick's the one that they specify. John Hick's the one that we did in pluralism. So the modern Irenaean Theodicy from John Hick, he believes that the world was not created perfect, but everything develops in two stages, image to likeness. We are made in the image of God, but spiritually immature. Through struggle to survive and evolve, we develop into spiritually mature beings. The fall is a result of the fall of mankind, the fall of Adam and Eve. The epistemic distance is a result of immature humans, because we're only the image. Likeness is when you grow into a relationship with God, when you follow God's plans, wishes and rules, and you move into the likeness, image to likeness. Leona, sorry, excuse me, go on.
Did he label them like that?
He was inspired by Irenaeus, but these are specifically his. But I think Irenaeus does talk about moving from image to likeness as well. But you can just put everything to him, that's fine. Yeah, if you just say he was inspired by Irenaeus, leave all this with John Hick. I'll give you a couple of things, probably next lesson now, that Irenaeus said that's different. God's presence isn't always obvious, because then we wouldn't have full free will, so God can't make it obvious that he is here. And John Hick does argue that everybody will be eventually saved. Irenaeus does not agree. This is where John Hick goes off-piste, does his own thing. John Hick is the one that argues for purgatory, not Irenaeus. Irenaeus does believe in hell. So according to Hick, everybody will be saved eventually. Universal salvation. This is what we did in Pluralism and Society, in Pluralism Theology. But some do need post-death or after-death soul-making. Purgatory. So some people don't get it quite right this world. Some people don't quite mature fully. Therefore need a little bit of tweaking in purgatory. However, all will be saved. But that saving, that salvation has to be earned. Purgatory is a modern idea, and it's not one supported, certainly not by our oldies like Augustine and Irenaeus, and it's not supported by a lot of Christians. We'll do one more slide and then we'll finish for the day. So one more slide. Then what we've got to do is a bit more John Hick, a few free will supporters, so the rest of the PowerPoint is quite straightforward. We'll get this done in the first half of Thursday, and then we'll start teleological. We'll easily get teleological done Thursday, so cosmological will be Friday. Josh?
Is John Hick a Catholic then, because he believes in purgatory, but he doesn't believe in, like, he's a pluralist as well, is he?
John Hick's not a Catholic.
I thought only Catholics believe in purgatory, but I thought that was like...
I think, again, this is the difficulty of pigeonholing. I think Catholicism supports the ideas of purgatory, but they are not the only, because again, you might have a Church of England that follows a little bit of Catholicism, but is still more Church of England, or so. I think I can't remember. He was an evangelicalist, but then he moved more towards the pluralist idea. So I don't know whether he'd pigeonhole himself as Church of England or not. I'm not sure, but for him, he did believe in purgatory, even though it's more of a Catholic idea. But he's definitely not a Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah, good question, Bethany.
Are there any John Hick quotes?
Is there any John Hick quotes?
Yeah,
Tons. He wrote a whole book on death and eternal life, death and afterlife. John Hick's fantastic, so that would be a Google. I'm not sure if there's any John Hick quotes coming up. So definitely, yeah.
Can you quote out like his email to you, then think it's to mind, body, soul, and how you need your body to get over to Scarborough?
Oh, very funny. No, because the examiners will never know about it. No. All right, last slide. It's split quite oddly. You've got a box and then two underneath. That's for how the slide looks. So the box at the top is for the quote, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness." You can add the bit at the top if you wanted to help you remember it. Basically, John Hick's idea of stage 1 and stage 2 come from the Bible passage. You have to learn this slide. This is a pass-fail territory. You have to know that John Hick was inspired by Irenaeus. Both of them were inspired by this biblical quote in Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Don't go all Mary Daly on me with the man in make man. It means mankind, it means make everyone. Image meaning that we are made in the image of God with the potential for good. Humans cannot receive fully made goodness at creation because we are spiritually immature. We need free will to develop our own goodness, because it's better than just ready-made goodness. Here's your goodness. No, you have to earn it. You have to use your free will to choose and decide upon it. The gift of moral perfection would have meant nothing if we had not learnt the value of it for ourselves by earning it. The next part of the box is a lot easier. Likeness. We are moving towards the likeness of God, becoming good with the potential to be like God. We become like God by freely choosing goodness. Do good, more like God. What would God do? Image is where we are at the moment. Spiritually immature, with free will, with the decision to do good or bad. The last point on the image box, this idea of the gift of moral perfection wouldn't have meant anything. The example I always give is when you have a job and you earn your own money, so any of you have weekend jobs, you earn your own money, you value money much more than if it's just given to you. So you might go down to Domino's, your bill's 20 quid for a couple of pizzas and some chicken wings, and if your mum or your granny or whoever it is gives you the money, you'll think, oh, 20 quid, I'll pay. Somebody works, they think, God, it's only 3 hours worth of work. I don't know how much minimum wage is, but it's about 3 hours, so you'll think, gosh, I had to do that whole shift for this pizza. Now I'll just go to Sainsbury's and get one for a £5 instead. You value money much more when you have to earn it. This is exactly the same in this case. You value goodness much more when you have to earn it. God could have made us in his power all good. It wouldn't have meant as much if we hadn't have earned it.
It tastes nice when you cook it rather than ready.
Alright, continuing with Irenaeus then and John Hick, you should have a large 2 boxes, so these are 2 key parts of John Hick's argument. Don't forget, John Hick was inspired by Irenaeus' ideas. You'll only get a question on John Hick in your exam. John Hick also looks at God's responsibility. He says God is not responsible for us disobeying and turning to evil, moral evil, through our free will. God has to remain at an epistemic distance in order for us to mature. The epistemic distance is the fall of man, Adam and Eve from paradise, and he has to remain at this distance for us to mature. Why? Because we are spiritually immature. Natural evil enables humans to reach the divine likeness, because this world is a veil of soul making. That's a very, very important phrase. What it means is your souls are made here, they grow here, they develop here into the likeness of God, moving from image to likeness. This is only possible with free will and the option of doing bad and the test of natural evil. So you need free will, you need the option to do bad, so your free will says you can do good or bad, and you need the test of natural evil. If everything was just rosy and nice, you'd never be tested. You have to have natural evil to see how you respond. So it's not even that we never experience earthquakes or tsunamis or something. It's how you help those that have suffered with these things. Just like an athlete who trains their body and mind and tests themselves in order to build the perfect physique. So this is about developing your soul. This one is soul making, Augustine is soul deciding. Slide in the box. Please will you put a circle or highlight the word test, the test of natural evil, the test. A lot of students forget that it's a test for us. That's why we have to encounter natural evil to help us grow and mature, to move from image to likeness. So for Augustine, it's a result of what we did. For Irenaeus, it's a test. Don't forget to summarise as much as possible, please, because we do have a long way to go still. We're going to do teleological as well today, so the less you can write, the longer you can go. Any questions or problems, of course, always ask. All right, box to the side then. Is the overlap between John Hick with Irenaeus? So let's connect the dots between them. This is Hick's inspiration from Irenaeus. Don't forget there's a lot of time between these two men. Irenaeus was pre-Augustine. John Hick has only recently just passed, in the past about 4 or 5 years. And so there's a massive difference between them. Irenaeus did take the fall literally as well, but also blames the serpent, unlike Augustine. It's good to know the comparisons between Augustine and Irenaeus. So both Augustine and Irenaeus took the fall literally as the exact word of what happened. However, Irenaeus does blame the serpent, not just Adam and Eve. He said Adam and Eve were like children who go astray, who have not developed sufficient wisdom. So John Hick calls them spiritually immature. Irenaeus says they haven't developed sufficient wisdom. Even if a child is difficult, this does not mean a parent will abandon them. So there has to be a punishment to help you learn and mature, but there has to be a boundary to this. Because if the punishment to Adam and Eve was too much, God did not want Adam and Eve to despise him. Just like a parent cannot do horrendous things and then still expect their children to love them. So there has to be punishment, but with boundaries. So such things like the naughty step. We are on the naughty step now. Go and sit on the step, go and sit on that chair, think about what you've done, don't talk to anybody else, nobody talk to them. Exactly the same as our relationship now with God. Think about what you've done, learn from it, develop from it. Helping you to mature. Thus God has not abandoned us, but gives us the distance and punishment to mature. Salvation from God is open to all that use their free will for good. However, this is very, very important. Irenaeus, take your time with the last quote. Irenaeus did believe in hell. John Hick believes in purgatory. That is John Hick alone. Irenaeus believed in hell. And he believed that if you use your free will to turn away from God, you will then be punished. So he says that any that refuse the workmanship of God, your ingratitude, ignoring his goodness in creating you human, will mean you have lost his work on you. You will lose your life in against heresies. Ingratitude meaning being ungrateful. If you are ungrateful for what God has given you, if you are ungrateful for creating you human, and you use your free will to do bad things, you will be punished with hell. So if you get a question, for example, in the Christian thought section on death and afterlife, you can bring Irenaeus in there, fine. Not a problem at all. Remember that Irenaeus talks about the ideas of wisdom, boundaries. appear to be okay. Yeah. Alright, so the thin box underneath is a bit of a continuation from Irenaeus. It's his example in Against Heresies, Book 4 or Chapter 4. He gives the example of the clay and the potter. Now this is a really nice example to help explain Irenaeus's and thus John Hick's arguments, the Irenaean ideas. The potter needs the clay to remain wet so that it can be moulded. Once the clay has become dry, it can no longer be used. So this is the same. So it literally means a potter with clay. If the clay becomes dry, it cannot be used. That's why they constantly have to have their hands wet to keep the clay wet. So God is the potter and we are the clay. What it means is we need to remain open to God. We need to remain open to God's hands helping mould us into spiritual perfection. If we turn our backs on God and dry up, God cannot help us. So God's hands help mould us through the existence of natural evil. Natural evil shapes us from the image to the likeness, develops desirable moral qualities and virtues. Humans cannot get to God on their own means. We need a helping hand. So last year's question on the purpose of natural evil, the purpose of natural evil for Irenaeus and thus John Hick is this idea of moving from image to likeness, spiritually immature without sufficient wisdom, into mature, wise, spiritually perfect beings. Natural evil is that test that helps us get there. So that's in the long thin box underneath. The rest of the sheet's quite easy to do after this.
Can you overwork clay at all? For example, actually, just the physical side of the clay and pot person.
I don't know. No, wouldn't know. Box underneath then is for the two main critics of Irenaeus and John Hick. One is David Hume, one is Eli Wiesel. So you've got a box with a little bit attached. So one's for David Hume, one's for Eli Wiesel. Don't worry about the questions at the top. Hume says, could not our world be a little more hospitable and still teach us what we need to know? That is a fantastic quote. I am not a massive fan of David Hume. I find David Hume quite mean and biased, whereas this actually is a very, very good question. He's basically saying, yes, test us, but does the test and the suffering have to be quite so extreme? Does the earthquakes that kill thousands, does the volcanoes and the hurricanes have to be so frequent and cause so much suffering? Yes, test us, but does the test have to quite be that bad? Eli Wiesel, fantastic writer, highly recommend his writing. He was in Auschwitz, he lost everything in Auschwitz, and he questioned God. In the Bible, when Job has everything taken from him, God rewards Job and his commitment to God with riches, land, family, wealth, everything. And so what Eli Wiesel is saying is, God, you took everything from me, everything within the Holocaust. Where's my reward now for staying faithful to you? And so he wrote the book, The Trial of God. He put God on trial to say, to keep your promises found in Job. Where is the reward that I should have got? Josh?
Does Hume go in
The bigger one, and then that one, then Eli Wiesel's second one, yes. Yeah. Is that? Yeah, so one in one and one in the other. I do very much recommend reading Eli Wiesel's work. His book Night is very short. It's an easy read as far as literature is concerned, but obviously Night is written as from his experiences within the camp. So a very, very difficult read as far as the content, but highly recommended.
It says you can overwork clay, and if you do, it'll come cracked and stuff.
Right, so if you turn to God too much and don't learn on your own to develop, it can be counterproductive. So yeah, too much of something. Yeah, I quite like that idea. Where we are going is you've got a box with an arrow and then you've got a box split into three. These are now the supporters of free will. So you can either write it just down the edge and just put supporters, not the bottom box. So it's just the box split into three and then the one with the arrow. They are the supporters. Or you can just write it in the first box. That is fine. But these are the people that support free will. Free will is needed. Why? We're going to find out. And free will is the reason moral evil happens and all these things have come in the first place. So why do we even need free will? The first is John Hick's view. It's only the top two bullet points within that box. And then the second box with the arrow is the Peter Vardy illustration of the peasant girl. So nice and spread out, now plenty of room. John Hick argues that we need free will in order for us to love God. Love cannot be forced. You have to have free will to choose to love someone. So therefore God has given us free will, so we freely choose to love him. This is similar to the Aladdin film, the Disney film Aladdin. Genie can grant any wishes, but he cannot force Jasmine to love Aladdin. Why? Because love cannot be forced. This is very similar to the Peter Vardy illustration of the peasant girl. The king falls in love with a peasant girl. He can force her to marry him, but never for her to love him. Love has to be earned. You need free will to love God. John Hick, Peter Vardy.
Does Peter Vardy go in the box next to the outline as well?
Yeah, perfect.
Do you know the first bullet point? Is it supposed to be 2 or 4?
4, I think, yeah. 4 beings to love God, yeah. So you don't have to bring these in an end of an essay. You can bring them in at any point of an essay where you're saying why we need free will. Free will, especially for the Augustine idea, free will is what's brought about natural evil. It's the result of free will. Why do we need free will? Because God had to give us it in order for us to love him and turn to him. Box underneath that's split into three is three further supporters of free will. The three are those. So one name, one box Alvin Plantinga, one box Process Theology, one box Richard Swinburne. The boxes are extremely small, that's because you just need to summarise them briefly. Alvin Plantinga talks about robots. He says a world containing free agents is far more valuable than a world containing robots. Just remember, Alvin Plantinga, bless you, talks about robots and the idea that God could have made us into automatons that loved and always did good, but it won't be as valuable as a world with free agents. Process Theology from Whitehead and Griffin argue that God isn't actually omnipotent, and that just like a mother giving birth who does the first stage, God did the first stage and then actually hurts along with us now. So just like a mother who hurts along with her child, God hurts with us, because God did the first move and so God suffers. Richard Swinburne gives two very popular analogies, one of the overprotective parent, one of the toy world. The idea that we need total free will, because if God's constantly coming in and picking us up and brushing down our knees and saying, keep on going, it would just be like an overprotective parent. Similarly, if God kept intervening all of the time, we'd be no more than a Sims game, where God is constantly moving us, playing us like toy pieces. We'd be a toy world. He has to remain distant in order for us to learn. One little box for each of the names, please. You don't have to use all of them. You can just use one, that is fine. But again, you must evaluate them. Just putting the name is not enough. You must say whether their view works or doesn't work, is good, bad, unlikely, interesting, far-fetched, whatever it might be. Intervened where?
Like in the Bible and stuff, he intervened multiple times in the Bible with Moses, Abraham,
Yeah.
everyone, and then with Jesus as well,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So why doesn't he appear now? Could you argue with something like that?
Yeah, I like it because that would work as, because both Augustine and Irenaeus take the Bible literally, so they must accept that God does intervene. So why doesn't he intervene now? As a counter-argument against the Richard Swinburne, that actually it doesn't work as a supporter or a defender of Irenaeus, because they do take the Bible literally and believe God intervened. I think that's very clever, I like that. Excellent. Final box is for Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, presents the idea of, the book it's a huge book, but it's a fantastic book. The brothers did write some amazing literature. They presented this story of how a little boy was playing with the master of the house's hunting dogs. One of the dogs breaks its leg. As punishment, the master sets the little boy out and puts the other dogs onto him to maul him to death while his parents watch. Whether that's a true story or a story just based on something that Dostoevsky knows, it still implies the same thing, that people with free will do such unbelievably cruel things. He'd rather not have free will at all. The suffering of innocent children is too high a price to pay for the gift of freedom. He wants God to take it back, his freedom back, because he can't deal with the responsibility. It is too much to ask because of what people do when they do have free will. So he'd rather not have it. Is there any problem of evil related questions? There are three main chunks to this. The nature of the problem. What is the problem of evil? Your inconsistent triad, your evidential, your logical, with a bit of John Hick and Augustine. You've got your natural and moral elements and responsibility of God. You've then got your Augustine versus your John Hick. So those are the areas you might get questions on in your exam. The last couple of 2 or 3 slides, just your supporters and your critics can go in anywhere in your essay. Is everybody happy? Brilliant, well done.